Welcome back to Dreams of the Nameless, where the United States continues to run concentration camps in this dystopian moment. I wanted to pull together the current sort of state of affairs on the border since it's been, a week and a half, 2 weeks since we last talked about the issue. So there's still a bunch of kids in cages, lots of them, thousands. Facilities are still grossly overcrowded. People are being forced to drink from toilets. We don't know what the food situation is. There's conflicting reports, but the whistleblowing groups have basically been saying that they're just feeding them frozen food without it being thawed. And then there's other reports saying that they're only getting, I heard peanut butter sandwiches or ham sandwiches that are frozen. And that's it. And I'm guessing that it's probably not in abundance either. So that's still going on, and we also know that they're basically refusing medical care and hygiene. So there's still stuff going on like them refusing toothpaste and toiletries to the children, and not, more people are dying as well because they're just not getting the medical care that they need. So the administration is taking the way that I'm arguing. That they're taking this is in a two-pronged sort of oscillating response to the criticisms of these camps. The first thing that they're doing is just brazenly denying that these situations are happening or that they're a problem. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Particularly, there's a few high-ups in the Trump administration that are just basically making the argument that, well, we know what the rules are, so therefore everybody must be following them and everything's okay. The other thing that they're doing, that they're sort of going back and forth on, is just not talking about the conditions, but saying that anything that is happening is merely the fault of the Democratic representatives in Congress and their failure to pass legislation that would give Trump the money that he wants for the border wall, because then it would also cover organizations like ICE, and I forget the acronyms for the people who run the CP something or other, I think. Anyway, the organization that runs these camps.
I think it's CBP.
Yeah. And so, and people continue to deny the legitimacy of the comparison between these camps and Nazi Germany. And I can't cry on command, but envision that like a genuine tear of like, it's one of the worst news stories I've read. The actual fucking Holocaust Museum came out and said that it's a bad comparison. They're like, don't make this comparison. And so literally hundreds of scholars wrote them a letter and all signed it saying what you just did is bad for the world and you should recant that position because the comparison is fucking apt. It's the best comparison. It's the only one that makes sense. And so I suspected did you read my notes ahead of this? I thought when I got to that part that your head was going to catch on fire.
No, I had already seen, when I first saw that tweet where they sent something out, I was just blown away. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, these are the people who should be standing up going, yeah, we've seen this before. Like, we have a whole museum dedicated to having seen this before.
And it's more of this, well, they're not actually, conveyor belt murdering people yet. Therefore, the criticism doesn't make sense. And it's, I think if we were to ask if we were to resurrect one of the open grave sites that they found in Auschwitz or whatever, and asked all those people, like, well, it was probably pretty obvious before they started killing you that this was going to be a bad time, right? Don't you wish people would have called these camps what they were way ahead of time and prevented this? Do you think that those people would have said, no, I mean, why would you? The comparison wouldn't make any sense. So just wait until they start killing people and then, flaccidly try and defend us. It doesn't make any sense. So you can, if you think about it for even 2 seconds, you can realize that the reason that this comparison is made is because it makes sense. And so I'm going to, over the next couple minutes, I'm going to make a few more arguments to try and bolster that. But that's the state of affairs, is that there's still large contingents of people who are refusing to accept this comparison. And so it is slowing down the public's ability to effectively protest the camps and get them shut down or get them reformed or whatever. It's just making it harder.
But Tony, when the Nazis did it, they were abducting legal citizens. These people are illegal, so it's okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's literally just, oh, because I attached the label illegal, now it's okay for me to commit human rights abuses.
Yeah, whatever happens next. Which, I mean, is precisely what Hitler did, and again, we're going to talk about that. So, the reason that aside from just wanting to do an update, because it's been a central focus of this channel from the beginning, is advocacy for treating the migrants from South America and the Mexican immigrants better. That's been one of our chief goals, is to do advocacy on that front. Aside from that, though, last week, AOC and a few other people from Congress actually went and visited these camps. And these aren't in any particular order, but I just want to read a few of her tweets and take them in, and then maybe add in a few comments, because when I read through these things, unless you're going to take the position that AOC is a liar in the most dreadful sense of that word, her goals would have to be so dastardly, and her besmirchment of the truth would have to be so grotesque, that I think it's, when you read her words, unless you're going to take a really bad faith interpretation of her character on no grounds whatsoever, then you should find what I'm about to read to be pretty horrifying. So she says, these are concentration camps. According to concentration camp experts, people begin to die due to overcrowding, neglect, and shortages of resources. We saw all three of those signs on our trip yesterday. Another person died yesterday. And those are the deaths we know about. Members of Congress had to surrender their phones before today's CBP trip, but someone was able to get a device in. This photo is of a woman who we spoke to. We asked their permission to photograph. They said, yes, please share what's happening. And then this next bit, she's talking about these armed guards it came out and said that they found her to be intimidating. I don't know, they were trying to paint her as the bad guy. And so in response to that, she said, and to these CBP officers saying they felt threatened by me, they were literally discussing making a GoFundMe for an officer who attacked me on my tour. They confiscated my phone, and they were all armed. I'm 5'4". They're just upset I exposed their inhumane behavior. Then she goes on in a different tweet. There are 20,000 total Customs and Border Patrol agents in the U.S. 9,500, almost half, are in a racist and sexually violent secret CBP Facebook group. They're threatening violence to members of Congress. How do you think they're treating caged children and families? This was in fact the type of toilet we saw in the cell. This is referring to the toilets with the sinks on top. Except there was just one, and the sink portion was not functioning. Ayanna Presley smartly tried to open the faucet, and nothing came out. So the women were told they could drink out of the bowl. After I forced myself into a cell with women and began speaking to them, one of them described their treatment at the hands of officers as psychological warfare, waking them at odd hours for no reason, calling them whores, etc. Tell me, what about this is due to lack of funding? Now I'm on my way to Clint, where the Trump administration was denying children toothpaste and soap. This has been horrifying so far. It's hard to understate the enormity of the problem. We're talking systemic cruelty with a dehumanizing culture that treats them like animals. So that's the perspective of a sitting U.S. Congresswoman who is seeing the actual camps that we are holding asylum seekers in. Those are her remarks after visiting those places, and I find that to be particularly chilling. Perhaps the most fucked up thing that I've read in the past couple years. Certainly the worst thing that I've had to think about in America, I think, in the last couple years, in terms of something that the state is doing, and that isn't being decried. Where are all the cowboys, and the freedom fighters, and the good guys with guns, and the Christians, et cetera, et cetera? And again, we don't talk about this much, but my guess is that what percentage do you think of the people coming over the border are Christians? 100%? 90? I mean, we're talking South America, Mexico. Jesus is fucking pretty big down there. I mean, the Pope is from that region. Yeah, right?
The current Pope Frankie, I'm not sure.
I thought Pope Frank was Latin in origin.
Yeah.
I thought he was Brazilian. No, I could be completely wrong here. But
Yeah,
it's not actually Frank. It's Francisco or something like that, isn't it?
Well, usually when they become
Francis?
the Pope, they adopt a Christian name. But I think he, like you said, I think he was South American.
That's what I thought.
Sure.
So, I think the point that I want to make here is that there's a reason that people like me are making the comparison to the concentration camps. And that's because in all of the time that I spent at universities reading books about these issues, whether it was literature, fiction that was depicting these types of struggles, the struggle of maintaining freedom in the face of totalitarianism and growing racism, or whether it was the philosophy that I was reading as a graduate student, all of those things come together to indicate that the situation that we're going through now leads to situations that much more closely resemble the things that we don't like to talk about: the Holocaust, other genocides, the Russian Gulag. Those types of situations arise when there's a mixture of crisis, totalitarianism, and often nationalism. And all of those elements are present, some of them in multiple ways in this situation. So I want to move into, this is from The Hill. So who are these people that are crossing the border that we're actually talking about? So most of those being held in the centers are Central American migrants who traveled as family units and turned themselves over to Border Patrol to request asylum in the United States. While seeking asylum in the United States is not illegal, crossing the border without prior authorization and between ports of entry is a misdemeanor or a felony if attempted more than once. Previous administrations would release people seeking asylum to await trial, but the Trump administration has mostly ended that practice. So this is, I think, one point that people refuse to accept. We are treating people worse now than we were before. So it's not just that the Trump administration has a more conservative, strict view on immigration. They're actually decreasing the level of human empathy that our officials working under the capacity ICE, CBP. We're actively decreasing the accountability, the levels of cruelty that are acceptable, the levels of what I would call torture that are permissible. Those metrics are in decline, getting worse as a result of this administration's policy. Like not releasing these people to await trial for, what is a misdemeanor, but only because of a technicality. As I've just read, they're asylum seekers, so the reason that they're coming across the border and committing this misdemeanor is most of the time so that they can escape war. And let me find it here. A separate article here is on this issue. It's called "The U.S. is making a mockery of its asylum obligations." This is by John Washington. I just want to read a couple passages. So, according to a January DHS statement, MPP will help restore a safe and orderly immigration process. This is the return them to Mexico policy. Mm-hmm. So this is in January. It'll decrease the numbers of those taking advantage of the immigration system. Over the last 5 months, as researchers have documented, as the reports make clear with dozens of examples, and as recent deaths along the border and in detention centers reveal, the U.S. immigration system is neither safe nor orderly. DHS did not immediately return requests for comment. So what that's indicating there is that this argument that they're making that, oh, well, if we just slam the door shut and shove these people back into Mexico, it'll make the problem better. And that was 5 months ago, and they've been doing that, and it's not working. Because we're still seeing just these children being held in cages, and people are dying, and it's still going on. So the bedrock of asylum law is the principle of non-refoulement, a non-return, which is the idea that asylum seekers should not be returned to a place where they are in danger of persecution or torture. And though border officials are required under MPP guidelines to ask apprehended migrants if they fear being returned to their country of origin, they do not have to ask if they fear being returned to Mexico. Asylum seekers have to voluntarily express that fear in order to have the chance not to be enrolled in MPP. Yet, the report described exemptions from the MPP program as being nearly impossible to obtain. In a recent amicus brief filed by a U.S. Asylum Officer Union, asylum officers wrote that MPP virtually guarantees a violation of the non-refoulement obligation. So, what this article points out and what that passage indicates is this: not only are we abusing these people in these camps, but we're also forcing Mexico to take them back in, which Mexico does on humanitarian grounds, even though they don't have the ability to do anything to help these people, or their ability to help them is vastly less than what we could do. And so we send them back to these border towns that are notoriously violent, notoriously dangerous for migrants. They're just in the last couple of years, they've found like literally thousands of mass graves, where migrants are just killed and buried, raped, pillaged, sold into slavery. All of the things that we claim they're going to bring with them if they come across our border, they fall prey to it because it's literally taking groups of desperate people and then just packaging them for villains and setting them out like a parcel just to be picked up along the Mexico side of the border. So that's horrific. And here, Acting Homeland Security Secretary Kevin McAleenan, it's a weird name, on Sunday, he pushed back against what he called unsubstantiated allegations of children living without adequate food, water, or sanitation at a border facility. Excuse me. So, water or sanitation at a border patrol station in Clint, Texas. On ABC's This Week, Martha Raddatz asked McAleenan several times about reports from the Associated Press and the New York Times alleging children were living in overcrowded and unsanitary conditions, with disease spreading and not enough food provided. Raddatz asked McAleenan why, after multiple reports, he still called the allegations unsubstantiated. Because there's adequate food, water, because the facility is cleaned every day, he said, because I know what our standards are, and I know they're being followed because we have tremendous levels of oversight. So, this is bullshit. His argument is literally that we ought to just trust him because he knows what the rules are, and there's oversight, therefore they are being followed. But we know it's not true. We just read all these reports. We know that the guidelines aren't being followed. They haven't been followed since January. And even the guidelines that they are putting in are draconian. And so, the Hill also did a report about a watchdog organization report that it was called 5 Critical Findings from Watchdog Report on Border Detentions. And it details this whole list of conditions that are happening in these camps that are bad and that they call for that need immediate attention. The report said they observed serious overcrowding and prolonged detention of children, families, and single adults that required immediate attention. Detainees at CBP and Border Patrol facilities have been subjected to poor hygiene, standing rooms for days on end, bologna sandwiches as the only source of nourishment, and other substandard conditions. And this report is consistent, and the reason I'm telling you about it is that it's consistent with what AOC says. So when we have neutral or when we have advocacy groups whose intention is to get the truth on behalf of the suffering people. They are telling this narrative, and AOC is telling this narrative, and your common sense tells you this is the narrative. But then we have these disconnected, high-powered Trump officials coming in and saying, no, it can't be that bad because we have oversight, there's rules, all of this stuff. Don't mind the pictures you've seen. Don't mind the deaths that you're hearing about. Don't mind that the general swell of hatred is growing for these people in the minds of the populace as fed to them by media and by the rhetoric of the president and so on and so forth. Everything's fine. There's nothing to see here. So what's the bottom line? The public outcry is working. We got, and when I say we, I think it's, what is it called? The royal we. I mean the generally everyone who is opposed to these camps. Everyone crying out about it resulted in representatives actually going there. There's an increased spotlight on all of it. This is good, so it needs to continue. If we don't fight these people who are refusing to acknowledge that what's happening on our border is a precursor to greater human rights violations, it's much more likely that we're going to escalate to that level. If we continue to allow other Americans to dehumanize migrants and asylum seekers by comparing them or treating them like animals, that's exactly what's going to happen. I mean, just more than once in the last year, you and I have talked about people on Facebook pasting these long, copy-paste diatribes where they liken Mexicans to raccoons or rats or whatever. That's exactly what the Nazis did when they were talking about the Jews. It's exactly the same types of mechanisms that are taking place. So even though the last months have seen a slight decrease in people coming across the border, I don't think that is necessarily a good sign, because as global warming continues to get worse, this problem is going to be exacerbated. Over and over and over, it's going to cycle and get worse and worse and worse. We're going to see more people trying to get into the United States because they're not going to be able to get food and security and whatever in their home areas. And so it's worth keeping that in mind. So it's a mixed bag. It's good that the spotlight has been put on this issue, but it's bad that so much of the country and so many outlets are still refusing to acknowledge the dire level to which this humanitarian crisis has reached. So did you have anything you wanted to throw in, or any comments, anything like that?
Yeah, I wanted to point out that, when you talk about AOC visiting or this watchdog group visiting, they're just one among many. Every time I see a news article about anybody visiting one of these camps, unless they're just a dotty or a tottering old fool who's just kowtowing to the government, they always come out of there with pictures and reports of oh my God, the conditions are horrendous, every single time. And so it's just AOC saying things. I think it's just yet another tick in the column of yep, things are fucked up there. We don't have to question whether or not she's telling the truth, because what she's saying is literally consistent, as you said, with every other person who's entered one of those camps. And so I don't know what more we can do when all of the evidence is saying these places are fucked up, they're horrible, they're concentration camps, we're on the verge of genocide and human atrocities that we've never seen in territorial borders of the U.S.
Yes, because people are dying.
Yeah.
And it's not mechanized yet. It's not mechanized. That is a distinction, but it's not as important a distinction as so many people are trying to imply. The crux of the matter is that we're jamming people into cages like animals, and they're getting sick, and they're dying, and we're not feeding them well enough.
Yep. And the true numbers are being hidden, because they're not required to report when people die. So we're only finding out through secondary means.
And they're profiting. The companies are profiting. They get paid per inmate, and so they're incentivized to overcrowd.
Yep.
All of those things are happening.
I saw one meme where essentially some Trump administrator had pushed for ruling on the border issues, and then left the government and became the board member of one of these private prison groups that got a contract to then be in charge of the private prisons.
Wow, that's horrific.
Yeah, it's just this super corrupt system where we're just patting ourselves on the back and feeding, you know, money and resources into the private prisons who are lining their pockets, but not in any way moving those benefits onto the people that they're imprisoning.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I also want to know, I don't care if they're illegal. I don't care if they're criminals. I don't care if they're murderers. I don't care any of that. We treat murderers better than that. In the United States, factually, if you are a citizen, you get treated very well in our prisons. I just don't know why that should be any different, even if they are criminals, even if we grant all of those complaints, then these people need to be treated in the same way that we already treat criminals. Like, that's a bottom line for me. I don't care about anything else. Once we reach a bare minimum of humanitarian treatment, maybe then we can entertain arguments about, you know, how the immigration process should be changed or what have you. But we're not doing that. We're just imprisoning them and killing them.
No, I agree with you 100%. There needs to be a baseline of humanitarian care that is established before anything else. And as it stands now, continue to resist. Continue to call these places concentration camps, because that's what they are.